mind games, psychological warfare in snooker. Snooker is not just a game of skill. It is a battle of the mind. The table may be green, the balls may be smooth and polished, but beneath the surface of every frame, there is a psychological war being waged. Every player who has ever lifted a cue in a professional tournament knows that snooker is not simply about potting balls. It's about outthinking your opponent, exploiting their weaknesses, and bending their mental resilience to your will. A night at the Crucible. It was the quarterfinals of the World Snooker Championship at the Crucible Theater. The crowd was hushed, the air thick with anticipation. Two players faced off. James, the Iceman Carter, a seasoned veteran with nerves of steel, and Damien Flash Reynolds, a fiery young talent known for his aggressive attacking play. James had been on the circuit for over 2 decades, a master of safety play and mind games. Damien, on the other hand, was a rising star who had taken the snooker world by storm with his flair and audacity. While their styles differed, one thing was clear: this was going to be a clash of mental endurance as much as technical ability. The first blow. The match started with a break-off by James, who sent the cue ball safely to the ball cushion. Damien responded quickly, potting a long red and setting himself up for a break. He raced to a 40-point lead within minutes, his potting precision intimidatingly sharp. But James was unshaken. He knew Damien thrived on momentum. The faster the game, the more confident he became. James, therefore, made it his mission to slow the game down. He began to take longer over his shots, ensuring Damien had to wait before he could return to the table. He adjusted his gloves deliberately, walked around the table more than necessary, and took deep breaths before striking. Each action chipped away at Damien's rhythm. By the third frame, Damien's impatience began to show. He started fidgeting, exhaling audibly, and shaking his head. James, catching on, amplified his tactics. After a particularly long safety exchange, he feigned indecision, chalked his cue multiple times, and walked around the table as if reconsidering his shot. Then came the first critical moment. James left Damien an uncomfortable long red, one that was possible but risky. Damien, eager to get back into his rhythm, took it on impulsively. The ball rattled in the jaws of the pocket but stayed out. James pounced, clearing up the frame clinically. Damien sat motionless, gripping his cue a little too tightly. Between frames, James casually leaned back in his chair, sipping water with a composed demeanor. Damien, meanwhile, checked his tip nervously. As the frames progressed, James kept up the pressure. Every safety battle, every long pause before a shot, every slow approach to the table was a calculated move. At one point, James called the referee over to check whether the balls needed respotting, an unnecessary delay, but enough to make Damien roll his eyes. The audience noticed the shift in energy. James had subtly forced Damien into playing the game on his terms, turning the quick-fire, free-flowing potter into a man overthinking every move. A psychological turning point. By the 8th frame, Damien had lost 3 frames in a row. His frustration boiled over. He slammed his cue onto the table after missing a black off the spot. The referee gave him a warning for unsportsmanlike conduct. James, ever the composed competitor, simply smiled. He had won the psychological battle. Realizing he needed to regain control, Damien took a deep breath, wiped his face with a towel, and deliberately slowed himself down. He made sure to take longer on his shots, mimicking James' style. It was a smart counterplay, and soon he found his way back into the match. By the time they reached the decider, both men were locked at 12-12. The match had gone past midnight, and the Crucible crowd was on the edge of their seats. The final frame was tense, with neither player willing to take unnecessary risks. It became a battle of safety play, exactly the kind of game James wanted. Damien, however, had learned from the previous frames. He stayed patient, refusing to take the bait when James left him tricky half chances. Instead of rushing, he methodically built a 50-point lead, forcing James to chase the game. The tables had turned. The final shot. With only the final 4 colors remaining, Damien needed just the pink to secure victory. He lined up his shot, took a deep breath, and paused, longer than usual. James, sitting in his chair, recognized the change. Damien was using his own tactics against him, composing himself in a way that mirrored James' own calculated approach. Damien struck the pink cleanly. It dropped into the pocket, sealing the match. He clenched his fist but kept his celebration reserved. He had not only won on the scoreboard but had conquered the psychological battle. James, ever the sportsman, gave a small nod of approval before shaking Damien's hand. The lesson of the mind games. As Damien walked out of the Crucible, he realized that snooker wasn't just about potting balls. It was about staying mentally strong, about understanding not just the game but the opponent's mind. That night, he had been tested by a master of psychological warfare and had come out victorious. For every snooker player, the lesson was clear. Skills may win frames, but the mind wins matches.